Welcome to our leadership briefing today. I'm going to turn it over to Jason Bloom with Haynes and Boone, one of our sponsors, and Jason will kick the program off.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff. And first, I'd like to welcome everybody to our leadership briefing series, which is sponsored by my firm, Haynes and Boone, as well as DART, which is represented on the board by Nevin Grinnell, and Southwest Airlines, which is represented on the board by Steve Cisneros. The leadership briefing series strives to bring business leaders and public officials to the chamber so they can share the latest information on issues and events that are impacting our community. And I see that all of our speakers have arrived, so let me introduce them today. So first, Terry D. Loftus is the president and executive director of TACA, the Arts Community Alliance. TACA's mission, if you don't know it, is to support excellence and impact the arts in North Texas and through grant making, capacity building, and thought leadership. Under Terry's leadership, TACA launched the TACA Resiliency Initiative, or TRI, to reframe vital support for Dallas cultural arts organizations during the COVID-19 pandemic. He is a Tony-nominated Broadway producer of Bandstand, which was on Broadway in 2017, and received the Tony for Best Choreography and Orchestration. He received his first Tony nomination in 2015 for The Visit, starring the legendary Chita Rivera. Terry is a Dallas native and a graduate of the Booker T. Washington High School for the Visual and Performing Arts, and he has been actively engaged in the Dallas arts and nonprofit community for many years and serves on too many boards to name in this introduction, as do our other speakers, which leads me next to Jennifer Scripps, who is the director of the Office of Arts and Culture at the City of Dallas. The Office of Arts and Culture, if you're not familiar with it, oversees 19 cultural facilities, manages grant programs which support more than 200 arts organizations and individual artists, and runs the city's public art collection, which commissions new art pieces and stewards more than 300 pieces of art in the collection. Jennifer oversaw the 9-year-long process, which engaged more than 9,000 Dallas residents and culminated in the adoption of the Dallas Cultural Plan in 2019. And prior to that, Jennifer worked on the team that built and opened the Perot Museum in Dallas, and she was responsible for all earned income revenue at the museum. Jennifer is also a Dallas native who graduated from Ursuline Academy, then went on to Penn and Harvard Business School. And last but not least is Andy Smith, who is the Director of Giving and Volunteering for Texas Instruments and is the Executive Director of the TI Foundation. Andy joined TI in 1997, where his roles have included media relations and leading the worldwide marketing communications team for TI's analog business. Prior to joining TI, he worked as development director for several nonprofit organizations. Andy is also extremely active in the community and serves on, again, more boards than we have time to name here. He's a 5th-generation Texan and received his associate's degree from Tyler Junior College and a BA from Southern Methodist University, cum laude. So now I'll turn it over to our speakers.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us this day. I know it's rainy, but this is where Zoom comes in handy. It's always so wonderful when Jeff and Ken call and they're like, would the arts want to do a talk? And I always say yes, because there is such a wonderful dialogue that we have. So first of all, we want to hear from you today. And I think I'll start by sharing a little bit of what the arts from the city's perspective, and each organization is different, but what we've experienced collectively in the last 15 months or so. But then I really want to let Andy and Terry talk, because we could not be where we are without partners like them. And I speak, when I say we, I mean so many arts organizations, but also audiences that the arts organizations serve, and kids and youth programs and senior programs. So I think it's really important to put the date March 13th, Friday the 13th of 2020 in your mind. Just 2 days prior, about 1,000 of us had gathered at the Fairmont Hotel to celebrate the TACA Silver Cup Luncheon. And it honored actually Mayor Rawlings and Matrice Ellis Kirk, two longtime art supporters, And I remember walking out and thinking, this COVID thing is totally overblown. We've had a great luncheon, we've been elbow bumping, and boy, was I naive. I clearly am not monitoring public health I wasn't at the time. Since that time in Dallas, we have done surveys, thanks to people like Chris Heimbaugh and AT&T Performing Arts Center and TACA and the Dallas Arts District. Our community came together almost immediately and started surveying the impact. And before the end of 2020, we had lost more than $100 million of revenue. It is far in excess of that now. We've lost more than 1,000 full-time jobs. And, thank goodness for science and the vaccines. The rebirth was happening long before now, but the impact is devastating. And they're saying, I'm on national calls with my peers that in many ways, the arts were the first to close because they were seen as frivolous or non-essential, where we were deemed non-essential, right? And we'll be among some of the last businesses to fully reopen, because if you think about the economics of a tour that Live Nation brings to the Majestic Theater, you cannot mount that tour until the whole country is reopened in some cases, and certainly until you can sell 100% of the house. So for those big performing arts tours, they will be some of the last things to open once we are substantially healthy. More healthy as a country. That being said, in many ways, I'm extremely proud of the Dallas arts community that in new ways found ways to flourish this past year. And just to highlight some of those, we had the first major symphony in America to resume production of live performances, and to do so in ways that have brought musicians from the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, one of the world's best orchestras, to Dallas to do so, to benefit their company. We have seen tremendous work in equity. I think given not only the pandemic that had disparate impacts in certain communities, but also in the wake of George Floyd and the long overdue reckoning, you've seen tremendous flourishing of some of the groups that work directly with those communities and present art that tell the African-American and Latinx stories better than some of our more established groups do. And last but not least, you've seen a tremendous flourishing of philanthropy. So the city was able to maintain support for the arts. I've learned on my national calls to always listen, because I don't know of another city that was able to do this. And we grant about $6.5 million in direct support to arts organizations. In the last budget last summer, we were expecting anywhere from 5 to 8% cut. And at the very last minute, the city council restored that. May it continue. We're also looking for our hotel occupancy tax as it recovers to grow, because we have a growing percentage of that. So the local government was doing what we could, but in no way were we going to be able to hold up the whole arts ecosystem. And so partners like TACA, and I'm gonna let Terry tell the TACA story, but stepped up big with multiple rounds of support. And TI, as our most stalwart, long-serving corporate leader, came to the table big time with TACA and with the city. And then I see Brian Flores smile down there. We've seen increased support both from federal government and from the state. We're watching what's happening in Austin very closely, but hopefully people are recognizing that we are a vital part of the economy. We are what differentiates cities that attract artists and young people to work in them. And so things like the last round of federal relief, the shuttered venue operator program that Senator Cornyn and Senator Klobuchar led. Just to put this in order of magnitude, the first round of COVID support had $300 million for the NEA, huge increase. Everybody was thrilled. Several Dallas arts organizations got grants kind of in that $30,000 to $50,000 range. The shuttered venue operator grant is $16 billion of support for arts and entertainment. It does include for-profits, unlike the NEA, but the city of Dallas has been able to apply for support for Moody and the Majestic theaters, where we present those big performing arts, and we could get $1 million to close our gap. So, you know, when people talk about roles of government, there's different players at different levels, and you know, the local governments could never have added that to our budget without support from the federal. So a couple of things that we're really excited for going forward, obviously maintaining that support. We have several major public art projects on the horizon. And Jeff Kittner, the screens keep moving around, but he's been instrumental in helping the city acquire a building in the Midtown development that will be a cultural center in North Dallas. So those are all just a few highlights of what's to come. And I thought I'd let Andy and Terry now talk about kind of maybe the TI Foundation and Tucka's respective roles this past year, and why your continued support for the arts has been so dependable, and how you feel like that's a message to the greater community. And then Jeff, put it in the chat. If y'all have questions, feel free to post them.
All right, Jennifer, I'll jump in. Thank you. And thanks very much, Jeff and Ken, for inviting us here today. Really appreciate y'all giving us an opportunity to talk about the great things that are happening in the arts in Dallas. And what's the old quote? Don't ever let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that's so true of our arts community in Dallas. Resilience does not even begin to describe what these groups have done. I'm so proud to be a Dallasite and to have seen how, and I think Jennifer, we may talk about leadership later, so I don't want to get too much into it now, but I do have to give credit to the leaders like Terry and Jennifer and Chris, who and the folks heading up other cultural institutions in town that really came together, developed lots of protocols and had weekly meetings, and we can go into that more later. But I just got to say, you think about the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra coming to Dallas. We showed them how it's done. We showed New York how it's done. They came to Dallas to raise money for their orchestra members because they're not on salary like the members of the DSO are. And so those folks, there may be some unemployment and so special grants, they've not been getting paid and haven't performed since March of 2020. And the DSO, that's huge, I think, just an example of how Dallas is leading. So the TI Foundation and TI have supported the arts as one of our core focus areas really since the company began and since our foundation was incorporated in 1964. Our founders were very much involved in the arts and instilled that in our DNA. If you think about the names like Cecil Green and Eugene McDermott and Eric Johnson, the contributions they made to the arts, not to mention someone who is very near and dear to all of us at TI, Margaret McDermott, and all the wonderful things she did in her 106 years. It's just part of who we are. And why do we do that? It's not just a nice thing and because our founders started it and Mrs. McDermott did too, but it's because we believe that the arts are a key building block of a strong community. And I think never more have we seen that than during this pandemic, where arts are what make a city vital and vibrant. Arts are a key reason that people travel. They're a key thing that people look to when they want to move to a city. Would you want to move to a city that had no cultural facilities or was just kind of a cultural wasteland? No, of course not. You want to move to a city where you can go out to the theater or the symphony or the opera or dance. Lots of great things to do, and where your kids can get involved as well. And so we know that the arts are really important for helping us to ourselves to attract and retain employees, but for other companies and for companies to relocate here and grow. And I'll talk now about the pandemic response, I guess. So Jennifer mentioned March 13th. Well, the foundation board meets 4 times a year. First board meeting of the year is always focused on education. And we had a great slate of grants ready to take to the board on March 25th. They sent us home March 13th. We immediately pivoted, one of my least favorite words now. Hopefully we'll drop that word soon from my vocabulary. But we did. And we started looking at the impact of COVID. Now, first, we did look at basic needs because people were getting laid off and needed food in their stomachs and they needed to have a place to live. But we got our first grants for that out the door on March the 18th. And then we quickly turned and started looking at the arts because we were quite concerned. The revenue streams totally dried up. Some of these groups don't have huge endowments. They don't have deep-pocketed donors. And even the ones that did are still struggling. What are they going to do? Take out a huge line of credit and then have a lot of debt on their books when they can reopen. So we were concerned about them. And in the, I guess the middle of April, no, April the 8th, excuse me, it was earlier than that. We issued our first, our set of arts emergency grants, one of which went to TACA, because we talked and turned to Terry and his team there, and we knew that they had lots of information about what's happening in the arts, and really trust TACA and what they do. They're really the United Way of the Arts. They understand the needs that are out there. They have a great, wonderful vetting process. Jennifer's team does too. But looking at what TACA was doing, we felt that our dollars would be wisely invested there. And I sat on that grant panel that awarded those emergency grants and recommended them. And I got to tell you, I have never been more impressed with the work that Terry and his team do than I was in that process. Very quick turns and come out the door. So that's and then we moved on to from that April round of grants to our second quarter board meeting, which is focused on the arts. So throughout that entire process, I think I was having at times daily calls, but at least weekly calls with the arts groups. I know that I serve on the board of the Dallas Theater Center, and so I'm a little bit more familiar with their inner workings than maybe some of the others, but they were going through a weekly budget revision, sometimes even daily. And I think they were up to budget Z or something at one point, just trying to figure out what's going on. But at the end of the day, to the best of my knowledge, Terry and Jennifer, correct me, I don't think we've had any arts groups to close. They're not out of the woods yet. They need your support. They need your company's support. We've got to make sure these folks survive, because they are what make Dallas special. And I'll end on this, that if you didn't think arts were important, after all we've been through this last year, through disease and everything else, the arts nourish us, and they bring the humanity out, and we need that. And I went into the Meyerson for the first time in months back earlier this year and heard live music, and that was just so emotional. And that more than anything else to me shows why we need these great cultural institutions as part of our city. Jennifer or Terry?
You are correct. We have not lost an arts organization. And I am very optimistic as we're starting to hear. I used to get calls about layoffs or crisis, and now I'm getting calls about season announcements, which is a marked difference. Terry, do you want to share y'all's response at TACA? We both mentioned it, but you were on it.
Sure. So thank you for having me, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry I'm not in my standard bow tie today, but the rain kind of got me on the way out the door. Both Jennifer and Andy have already given somewhat of a perspective, but TACA's 42nd annual Silver Cup was, as Jennifer indicated, in March of 2020, and Judge Jenkins was actually at Silver Cup's luncheon that afternoon and said, this is it. Friday, that was on a Tuesday, and he said, Friday, we're shutting down the county, shutting down the city. And so we just got in by the skin of our teeth, and knock on wood, to date, we have heard of no one that attended that particular event that was impacted or affected by COVID. That said, I had only been in this position for a few months when COVID hit. I joined in October of 2019. And so this was my teeth cutting, so to speak, which I wouldn't wish on anyone coming into a new job, to maneuver a for-profit or a nonprofit through COVID. So in March of 2020, right before Silver Cup, we issued our TACA is designed and set up to do an annual distribution of grants based on application to cultural arts organizations in Dallas County. And we did that distribution in March, and then COVID arrived full force, and our goal was to create an emergency relief fund, which we did, and infuse another $150,000 right back out the door to our grantees that we support. So we launched the emergency fund, and what was anticipated to bring in $150 finished out at about $705,000. which all went back out into the community. So the emergency relief fund was simply that. It was designed, no application outside of, just some basic information on where you were, what you were going to use the money for, but the barrier to entry from a criteria perspective was scaled back considerably. And our goal was just to keep organizations afloat. We didn't know what COVID was going to look like. If many of you recall, we were all being told by a lot of different folks, including the CDC, that by summer of last year, the heat would disband it and we might have another uptick in the fall. That did not happen. COVID got worse during the summer. And so what we witnessed based on the organizations that we fund was we fund small, medium, and large. So we have theater companies that are made up of 2 or 3 artistic directors all the way up to DTC, Dallas Symphony, Dallas Opera. And the impact was universal. So it did not look at any type of organization based on size or budget and say you're immune. That said, there were smaller organizations who don't incur expenses unless they're actually staging performances. So a lot of the smaller groups were able to kind of hibernate. So if they were not moving forward with programming, they were not losing money. Same time, they weren't making any money either. So that's where the emergency relief fund came in as a critical need to help organizations. And then you move into the medium size budget organizations to large, symphony, opera, what have you. And Jennifer kind of hit on this earlier. There was an initial reaction from not a huge amount of noise, but there was some, why do the arts organizations need support during a time like this when there are health related 501c3s that need support, social services, food, and all of that was true. But it was kind of unfair because it shined a light specifically on, let's say, the arts district and the real estate that is in the arts district based on facilities and not on people. And so our message collectively between the city of Jennifer's office, my office, TI Foundation, the Moody Fund, all of us collectively were, these organizations are made up of people. So it's not just the artists that you see on stage. It's not just the presidents and CEOs who run the organizations. It goes top down. So, people who are cleaning the bathrooms at Dallas Theater Center, at PAC, the Meyerson. So when you put that people aspect in perspective, it changed the dynamic. So we saw an outpouring of support from funders, individual and foundations to help support that. So very quickly to move away from the emergency aspect of it to, summer arrived, organizations have not failed, which we're very blessed to hear, but COVID was still there. So what do we do moving forward? Well, most organizations, large and small, had to learn this whole thing about how do you produce programming digitally? What does virtual streaming content looks like? Can you produce a play via Zoom? And there were several innovators that stepped out and did that first. It was very rocky, but more importantly, not how do you move forward with presenting content digitally? How do you monetize it? So a lot of folks were able to determine and figure out, can we produce a play, put on a dance recital, a musical performance virtually, but how do you make money doing that? So we launched the TACA Resiliency Initiative, which was designed to reward organizations who were moving forward with programming in a safe way. Most of that was digital. Some were doing in-person programming, primarily in outdoor facilities, Strauss Square at PAC, some other Clyde Warren. And again, that was a reduced application process. We were able to get money out the door quickly. So what typically is an annual distribution cycle for TACA turned into, between March of last year and November, we went from our initial distribution of $400,000 in March to a total of about $1.4 million before Thanksgiving. And that is just raising money and getting it back out into the community, into these arts organizations moving forward. So that was our immediate response to COVID. And then what we're doing now to continually uplift and support those organizations. And the uptick to us was the realization that even once we all determine what the new normal is going to look like, we will no longer do an annual distribution. We are permanently moving into a two distribution cycle annually, because one of the critical things we realized was these organizations can't rely just on funding one time a year. They need it more than that. So that will be part of our protocol moving forward. We successfully held the 43rd annual Silver Cup Awards Luncheon a few weeks ago at Strauss Square to half the capacity that we typically would in a ballroom. And despite the threat of rain, which kept me from eating and drinking for probably 48 hours, we managed to get scooped by that and had a successful event. And then moving forward, advocacy is a big part of what we do. Jennifer's office plays a big part in that. TI, Moody, Chris Heimbaugh is definitely in that camp with us. And as Jennifer indicated, these organizations still need that support. So while we're seeing a very aggressive rollout of the vaccine, it still presents a challenge, because now arts organizations have to go from panic mode to resiliency to now what will normal look like and how do we pay for it? So funding is still critical to what we need to do moving forward, as is advocacy. It's very important that the business community understands the economic value that the art brings to play in Dallas. As both Jennifer and Andy alluded to, we don't have mountains, we don't have beaches. We have the Cowboys, the Rangers, the Mavs, and the cultural arts. So as corporations look to potentially relocating to North Texas, you will not find any more vocal cheerleaders than us to say we are an economic engine that makes Dallas more attractive. So if you look beyond the tax, our tax benefits, as you look to Dallas, this is a major component, we feel, of the economic engine that makes us attractive. So I am done with my little sermon. So if you guys have any questions, we'll be glad to take them.
That was great, Terry. And I agree with what you and Andy just said. This is the leadership briefing, and I know that we always say leadership matters. And I said that during the cultural plan, for example, but I really feel like in many ways, the leadership in the arts community in Dallas, and I would say at the board level, at the artistic level, and at staff level, came out loud and clear. And I will share one anecdote, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think it was the very first Friday call. When I talk about the Friday calls, apparently before I was in this job, the previous generation of the Arts District leadership was not fond of each other and had not even met for lunch for something like a year when Lily Weiss was hired to be the head of the Dallas Arts District Foundation. And she said, this is ridiculous. We've got to start having dialogue. So we had gone to kind of maybe quarterly lunches, and they were perfectly friendly and professional. But Lily started doing these SWAT team 11 a.m. Friday calls. And one of our goals on the cultural plan is greater collaboration among arts groups to share resources. And whenever it would come up, we would get very polite nods, but there was no crisis driving it. And on the very first call, I remember the 6th Floor Museum and the Holocaust Museum, boy, they had found sourcing for K95 masks, and the pricing was good, and who do you have, and where are you getting hand sanitizer? And everybody was in this mode of just sharing links for things. And that has evolved. It's never gone away, but the subject changed. So then it went to how are you all handling budgeting? How do we share, HR decisions that are being made? The theater certainly had more in common with other performing arts. The museums kind of formed a group. It's gone all the way now to how have you handled your testing regime, your vaccinations? HR issues around both of those. I have never seen that the whole mindset shifted to we're moving so quickly, nobody should recreate the wheel on any of that. And it's been wonderful to see. And I know in talking to other peers in other cities, that has not have been the case. So Andy, do you want to add? And then maybe Terry will talk about just leadership, and you probably see it from a different perspective.
Yeah, Jennifer, thank you. I agree with you in terms of the leadership across the board is extremely strong. I've been in the philanthropic field with TI now since 2008. So it's at 13 years. And I can tell you the quality of leadership that we have now and the willingness to collaborate is night and day different. I firmly believe that if we did not have the leaders in place that we do now prior to COVID, that this progress and these things we're talking about would not have happened. We started seeing, well, Jennifer's when y'all were working on the cultural plan, and my former board chair, Louis McMahon, was on that committee. And my good colleague, Amber Scanlon from PNC were on that. And we all started talking, and I don't know whose idea it was that we talked about. And I think this is right before Ian Darrer with the opera came in, or maybe he had just moved in town in July, and he didn't know anybody, and other people, Augustine had moved in and others had moved in, and everybody pretty much, except for maybe 2 people, had been at their organizations for less than 2 years. And you're right, they didn't know each other very well. And we thought, let's just bring them together along with Communities Foundation of Texas. Monica Eggert-Smith was gracious enough to join us on that. And just to start a dialogue with hopes that there would be more collaboration to happen. And it did. I had one person tell me just breaking bread together was, because they're always so busy too. They never have a chance to just sit down and talk. And so I think and then, Lily's efforts and maybe some of what we did helped so that when COVID did hit, they already had those relationships formed and they were then able to go. And I've heard nothing but good things about the Friday meetings since then. And but more than that, what we're seeing now is kind of post-COVID, how some of the groups are talking about continuing to work together, not just though at a programmatic level where maybe you have some dancers, some Dallas Black Dance Theater in a theater center production, or Kevin directing an opera or something that way, but looking more back office. There's a few groups that are thinking about other ways we could share some purchasing power or HR support or insurance or those sort of things. And that will probably hopefully work its way out to other groups. But and then on just what Terry talked about earlier on the resiliency part, how these leaders were willing to take risks, not knowing what was going to stick, but they didn't give up. It's very easy, I think, for people to have looked at this and just said, oh, woe is me, we don't know what we're going to do. But that's why I mentioned the quote about the crisis started to the person. These folks these leaders have continually looked for ways to stay engaged in the work they do in education, the bringing art to the public and trying to monetize it. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. And I think probably in some cases, the crisis pushed these organizations to move digital or do different things that faster than maybe they would have planned on. But I think in the end, that's a good thing. And we just have a lot of confidence in the arts leaders. And I would put our folks up against anybody from any other city in the state of the world in terms of their quality.
Yeah, just to echo that, I think what we have witnessed, it started happening actually before COVID. You saw this outreach of collaborating across all of the arts organizations in Dallas, small, medium, and large, to where in years past that was not the case. And Chris might ding me for this, but ATPAC and Dallas Summer Musicals is a great example of, there's a line drawn in the sand and it was not crossed for a very long time. And it wasn't until new leadership came into these institutions to say, this makes no sense. We have to work together, and that's turned into a great relationship. And then you also had, especially the organizations that are in the arts district, And then all of the bulk of our arts community is not in the arts district. So we have our anchor, from the DMA up to Dallas Black, was just on the other side of my building here. But you have a wealth of diverse arts organizations that are scattered around Dallas County. And it became this situation of us versus them for a long time, to where that perception was, if you were not in the arts district, you didn't matter. So there was a lot of ship writing, so to speak, that needed to be done, that actually started well before COVID. But because of that, once the pandemic hit, you saw this, collaboration is another word like pivot for 2020, but it was aggressive, it was comprehensive, it was transparent, and all of the organizations rallied together to make sure. ATPAC, for example, which is, relies heavily on touring companies that are coming through from Broadway, and then, some other regional programming they do, was sitting idle. And so between Debbie and Chris and their entire team, which was brilliant, they opened up the use of primarily Strauss Square, because you really couldn't do anything inside the WinSphere, to other arts organizations of all sizes at, in some cases, with no usage fee or a very reduced usage fee, to help promote and cultivate the creation and support of local nonprofit organizations. So the three of us. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The Nasher was showcasing local artists like never before, and they converted their gift shop into gallery space for local artists, which has been extremely, so I think the small, large, local flourishing has been great. So sorry to interrupt.
No, and that's a great point, because we try and look at this as funders of the arts and say, is what was the uptick? What were any silver bullets that we could take away from the pandemic? And it is, to me, it's that collaboration and leadership. And two, it was the nimbleness of our arts organizations of all sizes to then take that spotlight and shine it back on Dallas, back on artists that are producing and cultivating work here, and showcasing that work, as opposed to waiting for the tide on the pandemic to turn to resume, business as normal. And that model is gone. So I don't think any CEO or artistic director or executive director of an arts organization is looking back to anything pre-COVID as a model to move forward with. So, and it's exciting. So I think there's going to be a lot of great new content and programming coming out of all of the cultural arts organizations in Dallas that's reflective of what we're living through right now.
So
Terry,
I'm not
can I just add one thing into what Terry said? And the silver lining on that too is these organizations that have done the digital content maybe a bit more successful than others have seen their audiences expand outside of Dallas too. So Dallas Black Dance Theater, for example, they're getting an international audience now. That why would they go back to how things were done before, when they are beginning to monetize that and getting donors from around the world and an even better reputation they already had. So there definitely have been some really good innovations to come out.
Well, the New York Times did a review of Undermain Theater's play, because the critic couldn't see anything in New York, so he was watching theater in Dallas. So, that accretes too, I think, to our city branding, which is really cool to see. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So one of my favorite questions went,
no, go ahead, Jennifer. I have questions, but if you want to ask one,
okay.
You'll articulate it much better than I can.
So I love to ask art people, what are you looking forward to seeing next? Like, what's on your dance card, show, gallery, what have you? So I'll go first. Pilobolus is coming with Titus in just a couple of days. So that's going to be very exciting. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Pilobolus dance group, but they're incredible. And then tickets for Wicked have gone on sale, and my boys have never seen that show. They know about The Green Witch. So we are going to go see Dallas Summer Musicals. And once again, Dallas is leading the way for Broadway tours resuming. And that is really, really exciting. Get that music hall back open. So Terry, what are you looking forward to?
A vacation. Fair
enough. Fair enough.
We're excited to see the resumption of art across all levels. And we announced recently also at Silver Cup this year that we were adding the literary arts to our lineup of grants funding. So we'll be busy prepping for that addition to our lineup. And more than anything, watching to see what organizations are coming back with. That's going to be, there's going to be a wealth of new art across all genres: visual art, dance, music, theater. And we're just excited to kind of sit back and see as we resume our grant application. Our next one will be just here in the next week. We'll be doing the third phase of our resiliency grants. And then in the fall, come back with those again. So for us, it's just an exciting time to see what type of programming is going to be coming up through the rest of this year.
So last week, this is something that passed, but you can go online and watch it. The Dallas Holocaust Human Rights Museum had a fundraiser, their spring fundraiser called Music in the Camps, and it's about in the Holocaust, where the survivors were prisoners were forced to play music. But the Dallas Symphony Orchestra participated in that and played some music from there. So if you get a chance, go to the DHHRM's website and watch that. It's really powerful. Then coming up, the Theater Center is going to return to the stage for the first time in more than a year in July with a play at Annette Strauss Square. It's called Working, and it'll be about essential workers during COVID. And then also coming up a couple of weeks, it's a delayed opening of a new exhibition at the Dallas Museum of Art that TI is a presenting sponsor of, called Juan Gris. He's one of the founders of the Cubist movement. And it's a really great exhibition. I encourage you all to go check it out. And you can feel very safe in the DMA for sure, because folks are distant and masked. But it'll be great to see a play on stage, not in the computer for the first time in more than a year.
Those are great. We got a wonderful question from Tina Young. Given that diversity, equity, inclusion is at the forefront of corporate conversations now, how do you see the arts continuing to bring a voice to these important topics? Do you think Dallas Arts leads in any of the DEI areas? So let me kind of take it from the city's perspective. When we did the cultural plan in 2017-18 and engaged with 9,000 Dallas residents, equity came out loud and clear that all of our activities needed to be approached with that lens, whether it's cultural space, cultural funding, cultural promotion, that we needed to sharpen our tools to always be more equitable. And what's wonderful to see is we are making strides. Let me kind of give you a few examples. We talk about Alana artists, and it's very important in a global city like Dallas to recognize that diversity has many different dimensions. Alana is an acronym that came from grant makers in the arts. So it stands for African, Latin American, Asian, Arab, Middle Eastern, and Native American. And I always say that because the DMA has the Kier Collection, which is one of the largest Persian and Iranian art collections in the world. And when it opened, they called the OAC and they said, so what performing arts groups do you have that represent this, Arab Middle Eastern area? And we were embarrassed to say that we had none. And when I talk to counterparts in other parts of the country, we do now. And when I talk to other counterparts in Seattle or the Twin Cities or even Oklahoma, Dallas has not always had great relations with our Native American communities and their dance and oral history traditions. So we're really working to make sure that we are representative of the full panoply of diversity. Our CAP artist roster, which are the community arts program where we send and pay artists into all corners of the community. If you are involved in any public free event, we would love to send an artist and pay them. But we've grown that roster from 35 artists to 44 just in the last 2 years. Which I think is really important because that is your grassroots. We had no permanent resident companies of any Latinx arts discipline in the city of Dallas. So when we built cultural facilities, check the box, the symphony, the opera, the DMA, and we had built neighborhood cultural centers that were in many ways that first step of opportunity for, performances in Southern Dallas or the Latino Cultural Center. But what these groups need is permanent space. And so we are in the process of adding a black box theater, and we'll have 2 permanent resident Latinx theater companies, Teatro Dallas, which is I think about 30 years old, and Caramillo, which is more than 20. So it was time. And probably second to LA, Dallas is leading the country in nurturing Latinx theater. And that program, prior to the pandemic, we had visitors from San Antonio and Phoenix that were coming to tour the LCC. So, I would love to see that continue. But it all comes down to money. And as we grow our pie, we want to put more money into emerging arts groups that speak to these issues. And that can also be groups that have traditionally been led by white people, but are, presenting new works, paying artists directly. But really, I want to focus on groups that are led, governed, and run by people of color. That one of the biggest issues, and I always say this if you supporting interns, when we did equity, one thing that's been a gate in the sector is unpaid internships, and working with all of our arts organizations to pay interns so that they can attract diverse candidates who, quite frankly, need a paying job. And that's one of those equity issues too, that if you're ever on a board and people are bragging about their interns, make sure they're paid, so that young people who need a paying job can access them. So those are just a few things. I'll let Terry and Andy jump in. And I think I have another question from Jeff next.
Jennifer, I'll answer real quickly just to say that diversity, equity, inclusion, we've had that as a measurement for our, I work for a company of engineers, so we like to measure everything, but we've had that as one of the measurements for how we rate the arts organizations for many years, but it's become even more important. We actually tweaked, the board did, I should say, approved language that tweaked what we say in the arts focus area to make sure we're being very intentional about diversity and racial equity, and also as well as our other focus areas too. But so that's what we're doing. But what I've observed with the arts organizations that we support and who I've interacted with is they're all on this journey. Some are farther along than others, but I can't think of an organization that I've spoken with that hasn't at least started the conversation. The Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, which is a wonderful organization doing some very important work, they have their second Racial Equity Now cohort of nonprofit organizations happening right now. Dallas Theater Center, Dallas Summer Musicals are in that cohort and doing great work. There are DEI committees on boards. There have been statements issued. There are goals that some organizations have, not just around how many board members do you have who are diverse, but also the artists or the people on staff. So again, a lot of work to do in this area, but the journey is definitely underway, and we are.
Yeah, I'll just pick up. So Andy's absolutely right. We're not there, but we're moving in the right direction. So one of the interesting things that 2020, as you guys know, was one of those years where what else could you throw into the pot that's going to make our lives a living hell? So Tina, to your question is very relevant in that I joked with my board when I came on, because we had a few board members are like, what is TACA doing? This is pre-COVID about, D&I. And I used to joke with them and say, well, sorry, by virtue of the fact that you hired me, you don't get to check off that box. It goes deeper than that. So what we're seeing, and Andy just alluded to this. So typically you hear of, especially from arts funders, it's diversity on your board. So it's gone from that to what does diversity and equity mean and the totality of your organization, and to the demographics that you're serving. So it's gone from, I would say, a high level optics play to say we should do this because we probably need to, but also because people are watching, to that optics is now not the main motivator, and it's we really need. So it came, when it came home to TACA, for example, it really hit home because we're a funder. So we make grants irregardless of, you know, what the makeup of an institution is. But now funders are looking at us and saying, you need, while you're doing a great job of that, what is your position on this? So we created a committee to look at our own protocol when it comes to this. And the first thing I did was reach out to other leaders that are doing similar initiatives because, you know, even though I'm African-American, I can't answer that by myself. You know, you need the input of others as you navigate this and put something into place. Now, I have a much different perspective than a lot of folks, but we're seeing art funders and other community leaders approach not only arts organizations, but those of us who make grants to say, what are you doing? And how was that outreach reaching not only arts organizations, but individual artists who these organizations rely on to provide programming and content. So it is, it's something that we're all very keen and aware of and very determined to make sure that when you talk about art cultivation, it's not just one group. You know, there are, and Jeremy Strict and I've had this conversation at the Nasher. It's like, based on the Nasher Public that they're doing, one step further is it's incumbent upon all organizations, whether you're in the arts district or not, to take what we do into every community and neighborhood in Dallas. Not have an expectation that these underserved demographics are ever going to come to the arts district. And if they do, will they feel comfortable walking into a multi-million-dollar facility in the arts district because the programming or admission is free? So it's more than that. So when you look at it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's more than just people of color on your board, your staff. It's how are you impacting the community? So if you're serious about this, what does that look like? And what is your roadmap to saying, we're going to partner with the city of Dallas and Jennifer's office and go into a rec center in South Dallas on 4 Saturdays and do music lessons, visual art, you know, teach kids how to paint, immerse their parents, because from an arts education perspective, you really can't get the kids engaged until the parents are engaged too, because, you know, my mom nearly went broke as a single mom doing dance lessons and music lessons for my brother and my sister and I. But had we not been exposed to the cultural arts, we would not be the people that we are today. So while I don't make a career, I'm a jazz singer. I can't make a career at it because that is past for me. But because I was impacted and immersed in the cultural arts, this gig that I have right now was perfect for me because I'm an artist running an arts funding organization. So all that to say, it has to be more than just the institution. It has to be the artist and the community as a whole. And that's when that impact and where the rubber will meet the road, so to speak.
Thank you. And I think Jeff has asked us the $1 million question, as always, which is, as we come out of the past 15 months and are trying to navigate the post-COVID world, between in-person, virtual, hybrid, you know, what will the arts community decide to do to appeal? And I will say we don't have an answer, Jeff, and I'll jump in and just say that. But this is my personal opinion, I do think virtual is here to stay. I also think you're going to see fundraising change dramatically. It's been amazing how virtual fundraisers have been successful in our community. That is not true in every city. I think as a parent, I'm very eager for things for young people in particular, like Terry was saying. a lot of, people are looking for ways to get out and kind of socialize their families. And I think that's really helpful, but I think the same is true for baby boomers. There's been hilarious things. Once the 70-year-olds got vaccinated, they're ready to go too. So we're craving it. And that in-person uptake, I think, is going to be tremendous. But I don't think everyone has the answers. However, I think virtual is here to stay.
And Jennifer,
Terry or Andy, want to wrap it up for us, or you wrap it up? I don't know.
I would just say I agree with everything that Jennifer just said.
Me too.
But I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I have so enjoyed this. I love working with Andy and Terry, but many of our partners and arts lovers are always fun to talk to. So Jeff, tell us how we wrap it up.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, Andy, and Terry. This was terrific. I know we had more questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. This was a fun and lively and engaging discussion. Thanks to everybody who attended. I'm going to turn it back over to Jason Bloom to close us out. And then after Jason finishes, we will keep the line open for networking. If any of the panelists and other attendees want to stick around to talk, we will keep the line open. But Jason, back to you.
Great. Well, thank you all for presenting to us. And on behalf of the North Dallas Chamber and our sponsors, just wanted to give our sincere thanks and let you know that we'll be making a donation in your honor as a token of our appreciation to the Austin Street Shelter at the conclusion of the Chamber's fiscal year. So thank you very much.